I'd like to see that phrase toned down a little bit, because that phrase tends to say, you know, if everything else has to support the comprehensive plan, and that's what's the comprehensive plan, then the regulations have to say, well, if the town supports that, then we have to make it mandatory. So I'd like to see that phrase toned down a little bit. You know, the town supports.
The town will consider.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure what the exact words are. I just think it needs to be toned down a little bit if we're not going to make it mandatory. It's the same way on the next page. The character consensus technique is an important tool that should be used, that could be used.
Gary, to support the concept is a lot different than supporting the constitution. Concept is something we're thinking about.
Yeah, but you know, you get people all the time that pick things out of various documents. Say, see, this sentence says this, the whole document says we should be doing this because one sentence says it. So
the developer comes in with his two plans and he says, I want to do the conventional one, and everybody says, well, this says we're in favor of conservation, so we don't take a conventional one.
You know, I think that it may take 2 or 3 sentences to tone it down. I just think that should be, you know, this is a concept that should be considered. It brings important things to the table, but it's you know, not, you know, the be all and end all kind of words.
Should is a big word. Should is a big
word.
Should
is a big word.
Shall is a word.
Yeah.
What does the current plan say for cluster? Does it say that you will do cluster since it's mandatory? Okay. It's going to be obviously more toned down than that. Should cluster be mandated?
It says that it's an effective method for water quality protection.
It's pretty wishy-washy right now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind it being a promotion kind of phrase. It's just when you get into those stronger words, it tends to drive the regulations.
Let me make the changes that avoid the implication that in every case conservation development is the best.
That's all right.
As a total town to suggest that it's an option that should be considered.
Should be considered, and you know, it's even.
I would not say it's an option to be considered. I think there are 8 people, there's 9 people in this room that need to chime in on this in the end.
Yeah.
But I think listening to what Barry has to say, some appropriate wording that all of us can say, yes, we agree with it. Because I think we do. Maybe it's just support the concept. How it's done is what we're talking about. That's what we're fighting about. It's how it's actually done. Okay, it's mandatory.
I'm wondering if there are certain phrases we all ought to put into the, when we decide about mandatory, we can decide about this phrase and stick it on a bag and we'll deal with it all at one point. Because to start watering down the language when we haven't decided what part of it is, if it is mandatory, if there's only part of it mandatory, it seems to me that we're allowing one faction to make a decision about the whole document before we've made that decision. So I guess I'm saying that I'd like to put that off because I think because there's a lot of other stuff we can talk about.
Well, I'd like to ask one question. What does conservation mean to each individual here? I mean, does it mean brush and woods and wildlife? Is that what conservation is to you? Or does it mean the way Jamestown was for the last 300 years? Not the last 50 years, but the last 300 years? What are we trying to conserve?
I think that read the document, you would see that there's a lot of components of conservation.
I did see those components, but when I see the implementation of those concepts, it's always, you can't cut down that tree, and you can't cut down that tree, and we don't want any brush cutting along there, and all of the vistas that I grew up with on Beaver Tail and East Shore Road are all gone.
Can I just interrupt Mike, because I don't want to get off on that tangent. That, if I dare say, does not have anything to do with the discussion.
But it does.
No, we're talking about conservation development.
Yes.
It has to do with a specific subdivision and an approach to how that subdivision might be developed. It doesn't have anything to do really with whether we're going to cut brush or not cut brush, or cut trees or not cut trees, or anything else. It has to do with a specific potential for a subdivision development and how we might handle that going forward. So we could go on for days talking about, you know, other things. Do you have any specific comments?
On the comprehensive plan part. Lisa, I just wanted to double check with you on the last paragraph, the conservation development at the very, on page 404. My understanding, if I have this right, is that this document is neutral to affordable housing, in that affordable housing would apply to, all the provisions of affordable housing would apply to cluster development equally as they would to conservation development, that we're not adding anything new. Correct. Right? So for a while there was, I think I was getting a misunderstanding going. So we're not actually creating new territory of multifamily housing in R20 or anywhere else than we have already. Correct. Okay. Well, then I don't have any more comments. Thank you.
Mike, do you have anything more specific to this?
That last page 404 was to make sure that your affordable housing requirements apply to conservation developments, not to go beyond them, just the same as any other.
As they do to cluster,
Yeah.
cluster development.
We thought about this and we didn't want, and this came from Lisa, we didn't want any conservation development plan to compromise our ability to do affordable housing in the way that it's already in the
Right, right. But there's nothing additional either. This is simply a conservation development document. It doesn't have anything else new added.
In terms of the principles of the comprehensive plan, do you have any other comments, Mike?
On the devil's in the details on the paragraphs on page 2 and 3.
We'll come back to that. Richard, any specifics?
No, I actually understood it pretty well. To me, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like we're just a planting cluster with conservation development, which I've seen work, and I think it would be helpful for us to see some of the board or see a presentation. But I have seen them. I've seen them work out pretty well.
Chris, do you have specifics that you want?
I think with everything that I've said is everything discussed, and I don't see anything else in there. I think it's pretty straightforward. This is part of it. And I agree with basically taking out cluster, insert the word conservation. It's much better than meaning to people. People just don't like that.
Well, I think perhaps when conservation's heard, it's heard in a different tone than what this means.
A lot more flexibility with cluster.
Can I wrap up the comprehensive plan then by suggesting that we
ask?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were going to be the commission.
No, I'm not speaking for the whole commission.
No, I'm good. I've got some comments.
That's fine. Thank you. Please. Go ahead.
On the bottom of the first page, I just had a question about, just based on past experience, if you allow a developer to put retention of stormwater, retention, detention in the open space, they will do it every time because it's something they don't have to provide on the street right of way or their own land. So I'm wondering whether, I just want to make sure that that paragraph, the last paragraph, doesn't encourage citing those in the open space. And I know the way it's worded in the subdivision and zoning is that it's the option of the planning commission to allow them, correct? And I agree with that. I just want to make sure this doesn't encourage it.
Well, the intent here is to encourage groundwater infiltration and overland flow from paved surfaces over or through the open space areas. I mean, that's how nature cleans stormwater. And to put it into a pipe and into a bomb crater, they call it detention pond, is really an artificial way of dealing with that. The conservation development designs that I've seen encourage overland flow in the open space areas. Not to destroy the open space areas, but in a natural type of way. That's where the open space should go, where